Hello, and thank you for joining us for the third seminar of the International Year of the Salmon, the IYS Seminar Series. My name is Aidan Schubert, the IYS Coordinator for the North Pacific region. We're very excited to explore the latest developments in autonomous vehicle technology for ocean sciences with you over the coming hour. I'd like to acknowledge that the IYS Secretariat is based on the traditional, ancestral and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for their stewardship of these lands and waters that have sustained salmon since time immemorial. Next slide, please, Caroline. Thanks. So this seminar is the third of a 7-part collection that covers a range of topics related to the IYS high seas expeditions as we prepare for the IYS 2022 Pan-Pacific Winter Expedition that will take place early next year. You can register for the remaining 4 seminars through the IYS website, where you can also find more information on the 2022 expedition and recordings of the first and second seminars. We will begin today with presentations from our 2 expert panelists, followed by a panel discussion session chaired by the IYS High Seas Expedition Coordinator, Caroline Graham. And we will conclude with a question and answer period where you will have the opportunity to pose questions to the panelists using the Q&A or raised hand functions at the bottom of your screens. This seminar will be recorded and made available on the IYS website by the end of the week, so be sure to direct any friends or colleagues that missed out today to the website. Next slide, please, Caroline. So ocean-going autonomous vehicles have recently made international headlines, specifically those from Saildrone Incorporated, for whom one of our panelists, Dr. Eric Lindstrom, is chief scientist. Saildrones are able to collect never before seen footage and data from the eye of Hurricane Sam in the Atlantic. Here's a short but action-packed clip on this topic.
Nature can be fearsome. We're not built to withstand all it offers. That makes collecting data difficult. And a new robot designed to sail within a hurricane, so very cool. Canadian storm hunter Mark Robinson has been close enough to nature to know the Saildrone can go where he can't.
We can actually sort of follow the storm, get it inside storms that we wouldn't necessarily be able to get ships inside. No ship wants to be inside a hurricane.
The company that builds the Saildrone says this is the first ever video from inside a hurricane taken from an untethered boat. It recorded 15-meter high waves and 150 km/h gusts, all the while taking scientific readings that should increase the accuracy of hurricane tracking models. Because with weather, every little bit of data helps. Meteorologists use satellites to see hurricanes from up high, sensors drop from planes to measure wind speeds in the middle, but the view from below has never been accurate.
We think it's part of the missing piece of the puzzle of figuring out how hurricanes work, and the reason why is we haven't had continuous measurements within strong hurricanes.
This might seem like a new toy for meteorologists, but if it helps improve hurricane tracking accuracy, it's good for everyone. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
So our panelists for today's seminar are Dr. Seth Danielson and Dr. Eric Lindstrom. Dr. Tetiana Ross from Fisheries and Oceans Canada was also due to join us today as the third panelist, but unfortunately is unwell and unable to participate, so we wish her a speedy recovery. First to present today will be Dr. Danielson, whose research focuses on attaining a more complete understanding of the mechanisms that regulate high latitude continental shelf environments, with particular emphasis on drivers of ecosystem structure and variability. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Lehigh University and Master's and PhD degrees in Oceanography from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Dr. Danielson is an Associate Professor of Oceanography at UAF's College of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences, and he was the 2021 recipient of the Alaska Ocean Leadership Award for Marine Research by the Alaska Sea Life Center. Over to you, Seth.
Great. Thanks so much, Aidan, and thank you everybody for the invitation to participate here this afternoon. I've been looking forward to this seminar for a few weeks now. I'm going to share my screen and get a presentation on board. All right, can you see that in presentation mode?
Looks great.
Okay, great, thanks so much. Okay, so what I would like to do today to kick off this discussion is just to give a little bit of an idea of 3 different types of projects that we've been working on here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks this year. I need to give the majority of the credit to Hank Statsowicz, who I think is tuned in today, and maybe he'll be able to provide some additional answers at times if there are any questions that are asked that I'm not able to answer. But I'd also like to acknowledge our partners, in particular, the Alaska Ocean Observing System, the Integrated Ocean Observing System, and NOAA for the funding of this work, and Carol Jansen and Shana Wisdom in particular at AUS there. So our interest as oceanographers here is on understanding how the environment is impacting the fisheries and the ecosystems that we're depending upon. And there are a number of things that have been very standard for us to make measurements on, either through moorings or shipboard surveys, or more recently, underwater autonomous vehicles like gliders. We're beginning to cross the threshold and apply them, though, to more than just the physics. And so our focus in some of these recent studies has been on the applications for the times of year that ships are not able to go out and do reliable sampling, the times of year where people don't want to be out at sea. And but nonetheless, there are incredibly biologically important things happening. For instance, during this winter to spring transition, you could make the argument that the spring bloom is the most biologically important event of the entire year, but there are very few ships out there in the North Pacific Ocean making measurements of these. And so we have the opportunity now to deploy some gliders and make the measurements that give us the understanding of whether or not a spring bloom might be a little bit earlier than normal, a little bit later than normal, stronger. Are the zooplankton in the water column? How's the zooplankton bloom doing? These are things that we can now get a handle on and be able to track and provide information on it in near real time. So 3 different types of acoustics that I'm going to talk about today include acoustic tags of fishes that have had tags surgically implanted, and we can detect their locations by hearing the tag from the glider. Second, we have a glider with passive acoustics on board, so it's measuring underwater sound, and we can have an onboard computer that can analyze the sound and figure out what kind of species we're listening to. And then finally, there's the active acoustics, biomass characterizations of where scattering layers are in the water column, how dense they might be, where they're located, and their behavior. And this gives us an ability to say something about the zooplankton and fishes that are in the water. So we're taking an approach here by outfitting our glider fleet with a number of different specialty systems, providing the most advanced flight capabilities that we can to gliders. Gliders are notoriously slow and susceptible to, say, ocean currents. But by increasing, for instance, the buoyancy range that they're able to operate in, we can bring them into more coastal zones and operate in places that maybe 20 years ago we would have been very nervous to operate a glider in. They now have can be deployed with a small thruster on them, so if they get themselves into some trouble, they can fly out of it by burning a little bit of extra electrical power. And then finally, the power of repeat survey lines. You do it once and you've seen something kind of cool the first time. If you do that every year for 10 years in a row, then all of a sudden you can start talking meaningfully about what's different this year compared to previous years. So our glider Shackleton was outfitted with a pit tag detector, a fish tag receiver about a year ago, and the Prince William Sound Science Center tagged about 250 herring with these small, about 8 or 9 millimeter long tags that are surgically implanted into the fishes. Those fishes were tagged about 1.5 years ago. So 12 months later, we showed up with our glider in the middle of the winter in January in Prince William Sound to see if we could figure out where the fish were, what winter habitat they were using. And it turns out that over the course of our survey, which lasted from late January until late May, we heard about 30 different fishes that had been tagged the prior year, some of which we determined were probably actually either dead fish or shed tags, because the tag showed up every time we passed over the exact same spot. But other fish we are pretty convinced were still healthy and swimming around, and we started to get an idea of where some of these herring were during the winter months, a key time in their life cycle just before they go into their spawning periods. And we were able to track the spring bloom from the winter period right through the early spring and into the period of time where we wound up getting nutrient depletion and the bloom started to tail off, and relate that to the oceanographic conditions and the light conditions. Interestingly, it appeared that in contrast to maybe our expectation that you typically need to have both stratification and light, there's some sort of optimal stability window perhaps for triggering the spring bloom. We found that actually the bloom got going very well with under the course of very weak stratification, and it was really the return of the sun that kicked it off in Prince William Sound this past winter. Another mission that we've been running, this has been since 2013, we've been annually deploying glider Freya up in the Chukchi Sea. We deploy Freya close to Bering Strait, and over the course of the next 2 to 3 months, run a zigzag pattern through the Chukchi Sea onshore and offshore again. And the passive acoustic system on Freya is listening for the vocalizations of marine mammals. There's a computer on board that associates the spectra that is returned with the characteristic spectra of these calls. A very truncated data set is shipped back through the Iridium phone system. Analysis can be then verified by an analyst, and we can get near real-time detections not only of the species, their distributions, and the environmental conditions that are associated with where they're at. And then finally, we've got glider Gretel that is just in the process now of getting an upgrade finished. This upgrade includes a flooded nose cone, this large black portion at the front of the glider here, with a Simrad EK200 fisheries transducer, and there's an Odroid computer mounted in the nose cone there as well. So between the Echo Acoustics and the Odroid, we have the Echo Droid glider. That computer system talks to the glider computer system, and then using a set of algorithms that is able to parse out the acoustic backscatter data into a set of key metrics that are then sent back through the telemetry again. We're able to understand something about what's going on in the water column without sending back the high volume acoustic backscatter data that's being collected by the glider. So this glider had the hardware upgrade implemented earlier in the year. The software upgrade is still ongoing. We had it down in Seward a couple of weeks ago for some initial tests, and we're pretty pleased with how everything is moving along. So this glider will be one of 2 that we'll be deploying out in the North Pacific this coming winter as part of the IYS program. And this is the International Year of the Salmon grid that's expected, and we have a couple ideas of how the gliders could be operating. One may be deployed from Sitka and work its way along the continental shelf break over towards Kodiak in the northern Gulf of Alaska. Another option is to deploy a glider from Seward, have it fly out and cover the track line in a north-south fashion along where some of the IYS sampling is going to be taking place. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do here is support an ecosystems approach to fisheries management through development of near real-time indices that are meaningfully tell us something about the ecosystem from both the physics side and the biological side. These information can be compiled for the current year ecosystem status report that NOAA generates and then passes off to the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council as they're making their decisions in the fall for the following year fisheries allocations. And you know, the fisheries surveys that are conducted from ships take a while to analyze all of those samples, and oftentimes those data are not ready in the current year for the sampling that was done. So the ecosystem status reports often have data that's about a year or 18 months even out of date. This is one way of getting some more contemporary data into the hands of the NPFMC. And then finally, we're working on expanding our operations here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks by training staff members and graduate students, the next generation of the pilots and technicians that we're going to need to keep operating the fleet in the future. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and pass it back.
Thanks very much, Seth. That's it's really fascinating work you're involved in, and really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that, particularly with the 2022 expedition. So our next and our second panelist is Dr. Eric Lindstrom, who is, as I said, chief scientist at Saildrone Incorporated in Alameda, California. Previously, he served 23 years as physical oceanography program scientist in the Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters, and spent his early career as a seagoing research scientist with CSIRO in Australia. He has degrees in Earth and Planetary Sciences from Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Physical Oceanography from University of Washington. His scientific interests include the circulation of the ocean, air-sea exchange processes, and all matters related to global ocean observing. Over to you, Eric.
Thanks very much, Aidan and Carolyn, for having me here today. And I thought I would forego a PowerPoint deck today and speak more to the question that was posed for the seminar about humans and technology. But let me make sure that you direct yourselves with your questions about Saildrone to our website at www.saildrone.com, where there's a lot of information and details for you about our drones. You can see over my left shoulder that we have 3 classes of drones. A small one, our Explorer series. These are the kinds that were in the hurricane. They do fisheries surveys. They've done the stock assessments for the walleye pollock in the Bering Sea and Pacific hake off the west coast. They can carry camera systems, the active and passive acoustics, as mentioned with the gliders. The next size up drone, the Voyager class, will just be coming out in 2022, and it's equipped for a little bit more power so that it can have a winch and a profiler and carry more power-hungry systems by having a diesel generation of some power. And then the large Surveyor class is one-off at the moment, built for doing full ocean topography mapping, multi-beam sonar to 7,000 meters, and it is soon to be on its way to the Cayman Islands to completely map their exclusive economic zone. So we have such a variety of missions, and more to come. I was attracted to Saildrone more than 5 years ago because of my interest in air-sea interaction and sub-mesoscale oceanography, and these vehicles are like perfect for this, for air-sea fluxes of heat, momentum, can measure carbon fluxes, and mapping of the ocean at this sort of 1 to 50 kilometer scale, which I think is something that will be a big focus of physical oceanography in the coming decades. So that's my Saildrone pitch, but let me sort of get to this question of the role of autonomous vehicles in high seas research, and will we need ships to go to sea in 10 years? And in my humble opinion, the role of technology has to be additive to the human experience and our study of the sea. Machines of all sorts have changed the composition of crews at sea. In my lifetime, it's been completely different from my first expeditions in the 70s to today. Now, when we go to sea, we have a lot more people just sitting behind computer screens for the whole voyage rather than out on the deck. And there's a lot more interaction with the sea through different instruments and sensors and technology and models and so on. So there are, however, some elements of high seas research for which humans are required. I think it's safe to say that humans answer the question of what we will observe at sea and how to observe it. And no algorithm has this capability when in pursuit of new knowledge, i.e. that's what research is, pursuit of new knowledge, and we don't have algorithms for that. The machines we have, the technology, the algorithms really represent the current state of human knowledge, and they're thus not equipped to play other than a supporting role in our endeavor, the role of cutting edge research. So don't misunderstand me. Autonomous vehicles are a force multiplier in high seas research. I love all of our new expeditions over the last few years where we have ships and Saildrones and gliders and planes and all out there uncovering how the ocean works in new and wonderful ways. There are now areas of research that are enabled by the dual use of ships and autonomous vehicles. These more expansive fisheries surveys. So we need the, what you might call ground truth or sea truth of ships and trawls and human examination of the fisheries, but acoustics can be tuned to collect a lot of the basic data and expand the surveys, and that's been proven successful now in the Bering Sea and the West Coast surveys that we've participated in. And then this other area, which I became really familiar with in my PhD and later at NASA, is sub-mesoscale oceanography and the role of eddies and fronts that are like the scale of 1 kilometer to 50 kilometers, where it's been shown that they have a inordinately large effect on the fluxes of between the surface and the deeper ocean of heat and carbon and so on. And these are really difficult scales to observe from a single ship, or you need a sort of a cloud of observations out there, and that is something that's going to happen over the next 2 decades. As NASA will be launching lots of new ocean satellites focused on understanding this the ocean at higher resolution, down to this kilometer scale. So I'm seeing that satellites and ships and autonomous vehicles are going to be working together for decades to come. There are areas of research that are now made possible because of this autonomous vehicle technology, like mapping air-sea fluxes of CO2. We can do it from moorings, we can do it from ships, but if you could put a fleet of autonomous vehicles out there measuring CO2 fluxes, you can start to do the CO2 budget, which the ocean plays a big role. And I think everybody really wants to know about the carbon dioxide budget of the Earth. And so that will be enabled by this kind of technology. And then we have the possibility now that we can do a high resolution mapping of the global ocean topography, which is still awaiting to be done. You know, as a NASA guy, I know we know the moon topography and Mars and even Venus better than we know the Earth's topography. So that's always a good sales point, is that there's a lot of potential applications of improved bottom topography. So in my personal opinion, we don't really grow the market for autonomous vehicles for research without embracing the role of humans in the research. They come together and enhance one another. So I think humans will always control the design and deployment of the technology, and humans will codify new knowledge obtained from use of the autonomous vehicles, sort of ever improving algorithms and ocean models and ways of sampling the marine environment. Saildrone is a super powerful autonomous vehicle for marine research. There's no doubt about it. But this task is dependent on humans. Oceanographers to interpret the observations, professional mariners to oversee vehicle operations, and the engineers who continuously perfect the technology. So I feel like working at an autonomous vehicle company, that it's all about the humans. And I don't think that that should be forgotten. And I think I will be making the same argument 10 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for those comments on the question that was posed to the panelists, which is, can these autonomous vehicles really replace high seas scientific research out on vessels? That was really interesting, and we're going to continue to build on that in our panel discussion here. So I'm Caroline Graham. I am the IOS High Seas Expedition Coordinator, and I'll be monitoring the panel discussion today and taking questions. So please, we'd love to hear your questions. You can pop them in the Q&A, and we'd be happy to take them. So Mark, maybe you want to introduce yourself. You're stepping in here to join our panel today. So if you could briefly introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline. I'm Mark Saunders. I'm the director for the International Year of the Salmon in the Pacific region, and sort of lead convener around our 2022 expedition that you've heard is going out into the North Pacific. I'm not an expert in Saildrones or autonomous vehicles, but I am pretty familiar with the questions that were that we're trying to raise and address in this high seas endeavor and that we're working on. I also spent better part of my career, 30 years, going to sea as a fisheries biologist, and been chief scientist on multiple expeditions, some international. So I kind of understand what it is to go to sea, but I'm very excited about to see what this kind of technology brings, and I'm really interested in sort of the most efficient way to implement it and bring it in to add to the set of observations that we've got. So I'm more here just to participate from that perspective in the conversation, and probably ask some questions of these two guys as we go along here. So.
Great, thanks, Mark. So I know Eric had a chance to speak to this question, but perhaps I'll pose it to the other panelists here. And that is a question about will autonomous vehicles be able to replace the need to send scientists to sea? And Eric talked about how we'll always be working together with these autonomous vehicles, with ships, with satellites, with planes, etc. But I'm curious about is sort of in what time, to what extent could these autonomous vehicles replace our need to go to sea, and could we potentially get away with sending a lot less ships to sea in the near future because of the power of these autonomous vehicles? So maybe I'll turn it over to Seth to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. So I think it's going to be a long time before we can have any kind of wholesale replacement of ships at seas. I very much appreciate the comments that Eric made. I see it as there being a ton of potential for the autonomous vehicles, and I think that there's a lot of untapped potential right now. I think that we have a lot of assets that could be deployed in efficient fashions to gain the knowledge, some of the knowledge that we're looking for. There are still needed technological developments, though, before you would ever want to replace a net with an autonomous sampling system. For instance, we need to know what species are out there, and the acoustics are not going to be able to give that from the echograms that we get from either a shipboard acoustic system or a glider or a Saildrone acoustic system. Nonetheless, there are technological developments that are allowing us to getting closer to understanding who is out there. The eDNA type of analyses have a long ways to go, but they also maybe offer the most promise for getting eventually to not only detecting presence or absence of species, but quantitative assessments as to how many of a particular species might be around. I see the autonomous vehicles as being really good at filling in gaps for the sampling, the shipboard sampling that's going on. For instance, you send a ship out there that has a hull-mounted acoustic system, and you're probably missing at least the top 5 or 6 or maybe even 10 meters of the water column in your sampling. Well, if you have a species that is preferentially using the upper water column right near the surface, there's a bias in the ship sampling due not only to the offset of the transducer below the sea surface, but maybe also with a ship trawling nets behind it, you may be spreading the fish out as you're going by, and there's just a big ship-induced bias as well. Or if you're doing it at night, there's known biases with net sampling with lights. These platforms, think like the gliders and the Saildrones, are very, very quiet and stealthy, and they don't have some of those same issues. So our acoustics on the glider, we can have mounted upwards, and we can then profile right through that upper 10 meters of the water column that the vessel's acoustics won't be able to. So I think those two systems working together provide a fantastic opportunity for filling in the gaps of information that we we don't have the ability to do otherwise.
Thanks for that, Seth. Does anyone want to add to that or build up or answer that question?
Well, I would, Seth, that answer was so right on. It was perfect. Saildrones in the walleye pollock survey and the hake survey, they have shown exactly that there are areas of the water column that can be missed by one platform and captured by the other, and that's worked out really well. And this acoustic system works great for schooling fish where they're the dominant feature in the ecosystem. Saildrones have also been used sort of on the opposite end with the tracking individual animals with the acoustic tags, tracking red crab or walking around on the bottom of the Bering Sea was a really cool mission. And tracking great white sharks between California and Hawaii. So there are, but this middle ground of tracking something like salmon in the high seas is a difficult scientific problem that I don't think has a perfect solution yet.
Thanks for that, Eric. And actually, I'm going to go to a question in the chat that builds off this conversation. So this is specifically directed at you, Eric. And the question is about how you think that Saildrones could be applied to study salmon or fish that don't school. And perhaps maybe you can speak to here your work on the eDNA sampling with gliders and what potential that has or what success you've had with that.
Yeah, so at Saildrone, we have one prototype eDNA system on our large Surveyor drone, which is a prototype provided and monitored and worked by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And so we're just the platform, and I have not seen any interpretation of the data, limited data that's been collected so far. But that seems like the promising next step. And our Voyager drones, which will have a more room for sensors and eDNA type sensors on the platform, they'll be out in more numbers in 2022 and later. And so I'm expecting this eDNA system to be able to go to sea in larger numbers and explore what it can do for salmon. So, but I'm a physical oceanographer, and I'm speculating only on the basis of limited knowledge here.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so I'll go to another question now from the audience. This one's directed at you, Seth. So there's a question about whether you could elaborate on the glider research that you'll be doing in conjunction with the 2022 IOS High Seas expedition and how those might complement each other.
Yes, so we're planning on flying most likely 2 gliders during the course of this upcoming winter and field season. In all likelihood, they will not be identically equipped. One of them will have the active acoustic system. The other one at the moment that we're planning for will have a passive acoustic system. So we'll be listening for marine mammal calls. The North Pacific right whale maybe using the North Pacific Gulf of Alaska as it's part of its winter habitat, this endangered species. Would be nice to know where some of them are. Of course, there's a lot of sperm whales in the Gulf of Alaska as well, so and orca whales. So I think that having these 2 different types of gliders out there, both of them measuring the physical hydrography, other aspects of the system like the oxygen content and the light environment, chlorophyll fluorescence, a couple other optical channels, that will be common to both gliders. And our deployment strategy is still under development. You know, we could envision deploying one glider and then 3 weeks later having another one follow it, so that we can look at some short-term temporal variability over the same patch of ocean and have one of them follow the other. They'll have sufficient battery capacity to be out there for on the order of 90 days. And so we anticipate getting a few nice long transects through the IYS sample grid area.
Thanks, Seth. So another question from the audience here. Are we getting closer to the time when an autonomous vehicle detects an acoustic tag and can then follow that individual tag and transmit location to satellites as it tracks the fish? Thinking of our Atlantic salmon tracking programs in the North Atlantic.
I think we're pretty close to that right now. We're for instance, the herring tag program that I talked about previously, we were getting the tag hits back in near real time, and one could envision having the glider surface frequently enough, say every half hour, every hour, so that if you did hear a tag while it was submerged, you could then redirect its course when it comes back up. So every time it comes back to the surface, makes satellite contact, we have the opportunity to redirect its mission. You could also envision some adaptive sampling built into the computer program on board. If you fly through a patch of acoustic backscatter that is interesting for however you define that algorithmically, you could have a glider program installed that then tells it to go back and resample that patch. And maybe you've got a patch of biomass. You could find the locations, not just doing a transect and seeing how long that patch is, but you could do a three-dimensional survey fairly autonomously and understand the true nature of the patch in 3 dimensions.
I would add that the Saildrone, one advantage is that we're at the surface and doing the satellite communication continuously. So that was there was a handful of individual crabs on the Bering Sea that were tracked around. So it is possible to follow. They don't move too fast, but the same would be possible with the great white sharks, but that they're in the open ocean, and you might need to have more than one vehicle to try and follow an individual. It seems possible to do this. We just need to get people to propose to do it and get out there and do it.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, another question from the audience. Are MEVs considered to be vessels or equipment under UNCLOS? And will their legal classification and the regulations that will apply thereof condition their deployment in high seas research? I'm not sure if either of you know the answer to this question.
I suspect Eric does.
I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really want to try and answer this question. I think let me answer at a higher level, which is I am very concerned that we would like to use these autonomous vehicles as part of a global sampling system, part of a global ocean observing system for climate and other purposes, but only 2/3 of the ocean is high seas and the other third is in exclusive economic zones. And one of the big challenges is getting permission to work in the EEZs of countries. And at the moment, it's a small, relatively small effort, small number of countries for particular missions, 1 or 2 vehicles. But if you can imagine in the future having 1,000 vehicles out there, like we have 4,000 Argo floats, it becomes a large international management issue, and clarity on what these vehicles measure and how the data could get through to the countries' EEZs, where they are, and all that has not been worked out. So it's a relatively unclear environment, I think, going forward.
And is there any movement on trying to regulate these autonomous vehicles at an international level, or not yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Interesting. Okay, we have another question from the audience for Seth. Is there a possibility for your gliders to be listening for fish as well? We now know what Arctic cod sound like and have identified vocalizations for various salmonids. And a second follow-up question, is there a challenge in transmitting the large volumes of data collected?
Yeah, so to hit on that second one first, we get the full data record back when we recover the glider. So in any of these large bandwidth data collection efforts, even just the physical hydrography, we send back only subsets because otherwise your Iridium cell phone bill gets unmanageable. In terms of listening, the glider is a really, really quiet platform. And so it's a fantastic platform to be listening for things, especially once you get away from the sea surface. You get quite a bit of noise due to waves, rainfall, breaking bubbles near the sea surface. The glider that we have our active acoustics mounted on is rated for 1,000 meters depth. And when we're going through the mesopelagic zone, maybe we're near a shelf break as well. Yeah, we're far away from other noise sources. So if we've got a passive acoustic system on board, yeah, snapping shrimp, all sorts of things can make sounds underwaters, and it's a matter of having the library to make the spectral comparisons to identify that you've just heard a noise that you might expect to hear.
Yeah, the acoustic and visual data sets from on Saildrone are very large, and so transmission has to be limited. You get the full data at the end of the expedition, but and you can get bits and pieces of the whole thing if you want, but satellite transmission of data is a significant cost in the operation of these platforms.
Caroline, we had Tatiana would have been on here, and DFO has Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans has a set of gliders that it will be part of this expedition as well. And sort of the vision that I'm hearing from both of you, a lot of it is a big application across, perhaps the whole ocean. How well connected is the community of practice around the development of these gliders and the technology? I'm imagining, Seth, at UAF, you've got a whole, you got engineers to work with, and then Saildrone, of course, seems to be, you are very international in scope. What do you think it's going to take, like, for this vision of being most efficient about developing this technology and applying it, say, like, if we are going to apply it like Argo floats with Saildrones or fleets of gliders? What do you think in terms of governance and connectivity around this community of practice? Is it there now, or what do we need to do?
I think we're not there yet. We actually have a fairly small shop, but there are only a few glider manufacturers in the world, and each one of them has a user base, and those users do have a few organizations through which they communicate with each other, and the coordination of glider missions is becoming a little bit more regional and a little less parochial over time, I think, and we're moving in the right direction, but there's more coordination needed. And if we're going to get to the point where we're having large fleets of these machines out there, we're going to have to train a lot more people very quickly to pilot them, to service them, to deploy them. It's the costs of logistics. If we're operating out of Fairbanks, which is 400 miles from a coast, and we have thousands of miles of coastline around Alaska, but the gliders get deployed from in the ocean, not from Fairbanks. And so I could imagine that we could have a network of trained technicians located at key villages around the state that are prepared to deploy, recover, recharge batteries, redeploy, and get them put out there. But that's a lot of infrastructure that doesn't currently exist.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really good question. And I like it because I spent 5 years as chair of the Global Ocean Observing System. So I've seen these networks and systems in all their glory. And I personally think that there are a few unsolvable problems here. There's logistics and numbers and training and people, and these problems have all been solved before for surface drifters, for Argo floats, for moorings, and so on. So we can have international cooperation. We can get the people to do it, all that stuff. I think the biggest barrier is one that we face for all the systems, is the barrier from going from research to operations, often called the valley of death. Getting the political will to turn these capabilities into a sustained network of observations. We can have them all, meet international standards for the observations. We can be coordinated. We have data systems, all that, but the political will to fund them and the political will to overcome the territorial problems of EEZs and all of that are the two biggest ones that remain thorny, even with successful systems in place.
So just to follow up on that, given the extremity of the heat waves and what we've seen, the order of magnitude of these impacts, is that enough of an impetus to push past this kind of barrier, Eric and Seth? I mean, it's massive what we're getting hit with and about to get hit with, maybe worse. And having this kind of coordination and observation linking with our decisions, do you think it's well, that's probably more of a political question to know whether common sense comes in.
It is a political question about there has been a trend over the last 10 years that moving away from maybe supporting observations of the ocean for understanding purposes, and more towards wanting to invest in mitigation of climate change and more practical aspects for society. And so I believe that the kinds of observations and deliverables that will sway the politics here are things like improving the hurricane intensity forecasts and things that have a direct impact on society. We'll still manage to slide in a lot of basic research in there, but selling these things on the basis of basic research is not doesn't move the politicians very far.
And I might add to that. I think that's right, Eric. And I would add that finding those points where what we're doing is valuable to society is the way to move that forward. So one of them is the aspects of, say, the forecasting that you mentioned. Another one is the notion of food security. And if the oceans are going to be providing sustenance for the planet, we need to be managing the extraction of that carbon in a smart way. And we're probably not going to be able to do that without a really good information base.
Well said.
Yeah, thanks you guys. Maybe Caroline, I know we're getting close to the end, but I think there's a nice segue there to our UN Decade project program that will be I guess a spoiler alert, there'll be some announcements very soon, but we have a project called Becky, Basin Events to Coastal Impacts, which is very much that's being put forward through our North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission and Pisces, North Pacific Science Organization, just to this end, to work towards these an observation system that links to management impacts on coastal from things that we learn about the open ocean and the basin scale events. So I think I appreciate your comments. They sort of cement this idea that going down this road of making bringing this operational science, which I am concerned about the valley of death that you spoke to, Eric, about trying to take this from from research to operations in support of real-time understanding real-time impacts on ecosystems and people. So yeah, thank you for that.
Great.
It's a big challenge, and we got to be all in to make it work in this coming decade. I think the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is capturing that thought and that direction that we need to go, and mobilizing a lot more people towards the political ends.
Thanks. Okay, well, with that, we're right about at our time. So I'd like to thank our panelists for a really engaging discussion today, and thank all of you for joining us. We will post the recording of this talk on our website, yearofthesalmon.org/seminar. So please share it with your friends and colleagues that weren't able to make it today. And we do have an upcoming seminar on November 15th. So Aidan will share the advertisement here. So this talk will be focused on salmon genomics. Tiny clues provide big insights into the lives of salmon at sea. So we'll be talking about things like environmental DNA and salmon genomic health assessments, some of which will be used on the 2022 IYS expedition. So we hope you'll be able to join us on November 15th, and thank you all for coming.